Dear Taurus, there are days when everything feels steady, and then something shifts, just slightly, not loud, not dramatic, no warning. Maybe it's a message that comes later than usual, a plan that changes, a conversation that ends in a way no one expected. In moments like that, I often think about the energy of Taurus, not in some mystical, over-the-top astrological way, but in a very human way. The feeling of someone who's used to standing on solid ground, someone who finds comfort in rhythms they can trust, who likes mornings that begin the same way, and evenings that close with a quiet sense of reassurance. For Taurus, stability is like a carefully tiled floor. They know exactly where each tile sits. They know where their foot will land. And when something unexpected happens, it's as if that floor gives a subtle tremor. What always stands out to me isn't how they react, but how they don't react right away. No panic, no rushing to fix everything at once. Just a pause. That pause can be misunderstood. Some people see stubbornness, others think they're ignoring the problem. But if you look closely, it's more like a farmer standing in the middle of a field after a strong wind, not complaining, not dramatizing, just quietly looking around to see what's still standing, to see what remains intact. I once watched someone with strong Taurus energy go through a major shift at work. It came out of nowhere. Instead of talking it through endlessly, they went home, cleaned the kitchen, reorganized the drawers. On the surface, it didn't seem related at all, but maybe in those small actions, they were reclaiming a sense of control, reminding themselves that not everything was spinning off course. There's something very slow, very steady in the way Taurus meets change. They don't rush to reinvent themselves just because circumstances shift. They don't deny their emotions either. They just need time. It's like dropping a stone into a lake. Ripples spread outward. Taurus seems willing to let those ripples move across the surface, instead of jumping into the water to fix it. I think this might come from a deep relationship with safety, not just physical safety, but the inner sense that I'm still okay. When things get unstable, they're not trying to look strong for anyone else. They're trying to keep the inside from cracking. I remember a long weekend conversation once, and when a Taurus friend said something that stayed with me. Sometimes you don't need to do anything. You just need to avoid making it worse. It sounds simple, almost too simple. But in moments when the ground feels like it's shaking, the first step isn't always building something new. Sometimes, it's just standing still long enough not to fall. Taurus tends to do this in their own quiet way. They return to small rituals, brewing coffee exactly how they like it, walking the same familiar route, playing a song they've heard 100 times, not to escape reality, but to remind themselves that some things are still intact. In a world that moves fast, where everyone is encouraged to pivot quickly, to respond instantly, to adapt without hesitation, that energy can look slow, but maybe that slowness carries a certain kind of wisdom. It's like driving on a slick road. Speed isn't always the solution. Sometimes easing up on the gas and holding the wheel a little steadier is what gets you through. Taurus, in the way I've come to understand it, isn't looking for chaos to prove anything. They're looking for steadiness. And when life unexpectedly tests that foundation, they don't tear everything down just to start over. They check each tile, they mend the cracks, they make sure what can remain, remains. It may not be the only way to face a turning point, but it feels deeply human. And in that quiet approach, there's something that feels reassuring, that even when the ground trembles a little, there are people who choose to pause, take a slow breath, and gently find their balance again. Maybe, sometimes, navigating the unexpected isn't about changing direction as fast as you can. Maybe it's about not losing your sense of direction when life begins to shake. And once they've managed to steady themselves, even just a little, what happens next isn't some dramatic pivot. More often, it's just a small step back. So small, most people wouldn't even notice. A lot of people say Taurus is slow to change. Maybe that's because they don't react in loud or visible ways. But underneath, I've always sensed something deeper moving. Like groundwater beneath the earth. The surface may look calm, but below it, there's a quiet process of filtering, settling, reshaping. When something unexpected happens, they don't rush to fix everything at once. They step back. Like a craftsman setting a piece of wood down on the table, all running a hand gently across its surface, studying the grain, the tiny scratches, not to criticize, not to panic, but to understand the structure. In that silence, there are questions. Questions that don't even need to be spoken out loud. What was truly affected? What is still standing? What should be kept? And what can be released without losing myself in the process? Those questions don't arrive in a flood. They come slowly, layer by layer, like peeling an onion, each layer revealing a different scent, a different sensation. Sometimes it stings, sometimes it brings relief. The silence of Taurus isn't resistance against life. It's more like the pause between two heartbeats. If you've ever sat in a quiet room and heard your own heart clearly, you know that feeling, not loud, but very alive. One thing I've noticed over time is that Taurus rarely changes because of outside pressure. They change when something inside feels ready. And that readiness doesn't come from panic. It comes from understanding. It's like deciding to move out of a house, not because someone told you to, but because one morning you wake up and realize the room no longer feels warm. At that point, the change isn't a reaction. It's a choice. Taurus tends to move through upheaval in that way. They don't deny their sadness. They don't pretend to be unbreakable, but they also don't let their emotions carry them too far off course. They sit with what happened. Maybe it's a longer than usual evening. Maybe it's a walk without headphones, just listening to their own footsteps hitting the pavement. There's a quiet beauty in that slowness. In a world that rewards instant responses, quick decisions, rapid reinvention, Taurus seems to remind us that not every question needs an immediate answer. Some things need to rise the way dough rises. If you rush it, it won't expand properly. If you give it time, its structure forms from within. And when they return from that silence, they don't come back loudly. They come back with a softer kind of clarity. Not the sharp clarity of debate, but the clarity of someone who has sat long enough with their own feelings. I once watched a Taurus navigate a shift in a close relationship. There were no explosive arguments, no dramatic declarations, just a subtle adjustment in how they showed up. Fewer messages, less sharing, not out of anger, but because something inside them sensed it was no longer aligned. That adjustment didn't erase who they were. If anything, it protected a part of them that's quietly sensitive. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't changing completely. It's changing just enough to remain yourself. And maybe that's what stays with me most about this energy. That adapting doesn't always mean bending to every circumstance. Sometimes adapting means keeping your core intact and simply shifting how you stand in the wind. Like an anchor resting at the bottom of the sea. The ship above may tilt with the waves, but the anchor remains unseen, holding position. No applause, no recognition. Yet, without it, the ship would drift much farther than it should. Taurus, in the way I've come to understand it, carries that anchor inside. When the unexpected arrives, they don't chase the waves to prove anything. Or they listen for the quiet thud of the anchor hitting the ocean floor. And from there, little by little, they adjust their direction. From the outside, no one may notice the shift, but within, a new order is slowly forming. Not loud, not dramatic, just a gentle sense that I'm still here, and I still know who I am. That feeling doesn't rise up like some grand declaration. It's small, almost a whisper, but it's enough to keep the inside from falling apart. And then, there are those turning points that arrive without warning. A message in the middle of the night that makes your heart sink. A decision made by someone else that quietly rearranges your plans. A short notification, and suddenly the next morning doesn't feel the same. In those moments, the very thing that once felt like an anchor, stability, can start to feel fragile. Because when you're used to a steady rhythm, even the slightest disruption sounds loud. Taurus is familiar with steps that carry weight. They like knowing what tomorrow holds. They find comfort in repeated routines, the kind that create a sense of safety. So when that rhythm breaks, the disappointment can feel real, not dramatic, not explosive, more like a soft emptiness in the center of your chest. Like when a familiar chair is no longer where it used to be. But instead of reacting impulsively, they often do something very small. They find their breath again. I've seen this in ordinary moments. When a room feels chaotic, they don't tear everything down. They begin with one corner, folding the blanket, clearing the desk. Washing the dishes left in the sink. Those actions may seem unrelated to whatever just happened, but they're a way of returning to solid ground. Little by little, order begins to form again, not through rigid control, but through the habit of caring for what's closest. Maybe that's how they meet chaos, not by fighting it loudly, but with quiet patience, like pressing a stake back into the soil after heavy rain. No need for force, just deep enough so it won't wobble anymore. What's interesting is that, in those moments, Taurus doesn't try to become someone else. They don't suddenly turn reckless or detached just to prove they can adapt. They remain themselves, just a quieter version, a more observant version. There's a kind of courage we don't talk about very often. Not the courage of diving headfirst into something new, but the courage of sitting still while something familiar is changing. The courage to admit, I'm sad, I'm disappointed, I don't like this, and still stay. When stability collides with chaos, many people choose denial. Taurus, in the way I've come to understand it, chooses contact. They don't let it swallow them, but they don't pretend it isn't there either. It's like walking when rain suddenly begins to fall. Some people run to avoid getting wet. Some stand beneath a roof and wait. Taurus may choose the second. They let the rain soften. They look up at the sky. And when they continue walking, their steps might be slower, but steadier. There are changes we can't control, but how we show up within those changes, that's something deeply personal. When we're in that meeting point between stability and disorder, something new begins to form. Not rigidity, not surrender, a different kind of balance, more flexible, yet still rooted. Maybe that's what people sometimes miss about Taurus. They don't hate change. They just need time to place the tiles back where they belong. And once the foundation feels realigned, they can move forward without losing the quiet inside. Somewhere along the way, they seem to develop a subtle skill, standing between two extremes without fully leaning into either. Not so hard that they snap, not so soft that they're swept away. In that space, stability no longer depends on what's happening outside. It becomes an inner rhythm, slow, even, deep enough to carry them across uneven ground. From a distance, nothing remarkable may appear to be happening, but inside, someone is learning how to walk on ground that isn't perfectly level anymore, and still hold a calm gaze. And sometimes, it's that calm that makes life's turning points feel a little lighter. When there isn't panic on the inside, the changes on the outside don't feel quite as sharp. There's something very quiet in the way Taurus endures. Not the kind of endurance meant to prove strength, not a performance. More like a steady resilience that comes from the habit of standing still when the wind gets strong. What stands out to me about them isn't the quick reaction, not decisive words, not dramatic split-second decisions. It's their ability to hold on to their character on the days when nothing feels easy. Some people, when life shifts, reinvent themselves completely. They cut things off, start over, and turn in a new direction without hesitation. There's nothing wrong with that. But Taurus often chooses differently. They adjust, yes. But they don't lose their core, like an old tree in a heavy storm. The trunk may lean, leaves may scatter across the yard, but the roots remain. Deep in the soil they've always known. From a distance, you might only see the shaking, but if you place your hand against the bark, you can still feel the firmness underneath. I once watched someone with strong Taurus energy move through a very difficult season. Work changed, relationships shifted. The ground around them didn't feel the same. There was no loud collapse, no dramatic unraveling, just longer evenings. A living room light that stayed on later than usual. They didn't speak much about what they were carrying, but each morning, they still woke up early, still brewed their coffee the way they always had, still kept the house in order. Looking at those details, I realized something. That wasn't mindless routine. It was a way of protecting their rhythm. Maybe an old habit disappeared. Maybe a relationship no longer felt the same. Maybe a familiar role had shifted. But what they didn't rush to trade away were their core values: kindness, sincerity, self-respect. When so much feels unstable, holding on to those things is its own form of courage. Over time, a different kind of stability begins to form, not one built entirely on external conditions, not one that depends on everything going according to plan, but one rooted in inner strength, the kind shaped by every tremor they've already lived through. It's like driving a rough road again and again. It's sticky at first, you tense up. You don't know what's ahead, but after a while, your body learns how to balance, not because the road has smoothed out, but because you've grown familiar with the feeling. Taurus, as I see it, doesn't seek out hardship to prove anything. They don't need to look tough. But when hardship arrives, they rarely abandon themselves halfway through. They may move slowly. They may say very little. They may need more time than others. But they stay with the process. On certain afternoons, when sunlight brushes softly against a window frame, I think of that resilience as a warm kind of light. Not blinding, not flashy. Just steady enough to illuminate the darker corners of a room. And maybe in those quiet stretches, Taurus learns something essential, that you can change how you live, how you see things, how you move forward, without changing your essence just to fit a temporary situation. That kind of quiet endurance doesn't make for dramatic stories. It doesn't grab attention right away, but over time, it builds a foundation others can lean on. People might not remember exactly what Taurus said during a difficult moment, but they remember how it felt to be near them. They remember the calm that wasn't exaggerated, the steadiness that didn't make things worse just because emotions ran high. And on days when everything seems uncertain, maybe what matters most isn't controlling every outcome. Maybe it's holding on to yourself, holding on to your kindness, holding on to respect for your own heart. From there, a new kind of stability grows, not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because something inside has grown strong enough to welcome what wasn't in the plan. That steadiness isn't loud, but it's there, like soil that's been packed firm after many seasons of rain and sun. And on that ground, Taurus keeps walking, slowly, but with weight in every step. There's a quiet kind of beauty in steps like that, not rushed, not pushing ahead to prove anything. Each step feels intentional, as if they can sense the ground beneath their feet, even when that ground has just trembled. For Taurus, adapting isn't about becoming someone else. It isn't about cutting away the parts that shape them just to fit into a new situation. Adapting, in the way they live it, seems more like rearranging their life while still recognizing themselves inside it. Not losing the familiar scent of their kitchen. It's not losing the steady rhythm of their morning breath. After upheaval, they often return to simple things, not because they lack options, but because they understand that small things are where the heartbeat can settle again. A slow-cooked meal, nothing elaborate, just something familiar, made the way it's been made 100 times before. Chopping vegetables, hearing the knife touch the cutting board, breathing in the scent as it rises. In those repeated movements, there's a quiet reassurance. A long walk, not to achieve anything, just to walk, to hear shoes against pavement, to watch houses pass by, to feel the wind brush against the cheek, Sometimes there are no big thoughts at all, just the body finding its rhythm again. A corner of the house rearranged, letting go of what's no longer needed, wiping down a table, replacing an old curtain, seeing the room look a little lighter, and feeling the heart lighten too. These actions may seem small, but they're a way of saying to themselves, life may have shifted, but I'm still here. I can still touch something real. I can still create order within my small circle. For a long time, I thought restoring balance had to be dramatic, a major decision, a defining moment. But watching Taurus, I've come to understand that balance can be much quieter. Sometimes it's simply placing the cups back where they belong, washing a favorite shirt, sitting down, taking one slow breath, and not letting the day dissolve into chaos. They don't need to make it a spectacle. They don't need to announce what they've overcome. Others may never know how many nights they lay awake, but brick by brick means something is being rebuilt, quietly, patiently, without display. Some people rebuild their lives with bold declarations. Taurus rebuilds through routine, through repetition, through waking up early again, keeping promises to themselves, caring for what remains within reach. And gradually, in the middle of the unexpected, a new foundation begins to form, not identical to the old one, maybe narrower in some places, wider in others, but strong enough for them to stand without trembling. What I admire most is that they don't treat upheaval as an ending. They see it as a stretch of road to move through. No need to turn it into a grand lesson, no need to dramatize it. Just keep walking, stay present in each step. Maybe that's the kind of balance we don't talk about very often. Not perfection, not total control, but the ability to live with what is, make gentle adjustments when needed, and not forget to care for yourself while everything shifts. On quiet evenings, when the outside noise fades and the light in the room turns soft, I sometimes picture it. Someone quietly placing the tiles of their life back into position. No applause, no audience, just the quiet knowing that they are doing what needs to be done. And maybe that's enough. When you look back, the turning points that once made your heart shake don't seem as sharp as they did in the beginning. They haven't disappeared, they've just changed shape. What once felt like a hard collision becomes a softer curve in the road of your life. After a while, the unexpected no longer feels like an enemy that has to be defeated. Yet it's more like a sudden rain out of season, arriving at the wrong time, soaking your shoes, throwing off your plans, and yet, somehow, leaving the air a little clearer afterward. Taurus may not love change. They may still prefer familiar mornings, carefully prepared plans, a rhythm they can trust. But each time they walk across uneven ground, they seem to understand something new about themselves. Not in a clinical, analytical way, more like a deeper awareness of their limits, their endurance, what truly matters. Stability, if you think about it, may not be a lake that stays perfectly still forever. It might be more like learning how to row when the surface ripples. You don't have to make the waves disappear. You just need to hold the oar a little more steadily. Some lessons are never spoken aloud. They live in the way we slow our breathing after an argument. In the moment, we choose silence instead of saying something we might regret. In the way we hold on to kindness even when our own hearts feel unsettled. Taurus, as I've come to see it, carries a lesson like that. Not about avoiding disruption, but about moving through it without losing themselves. It isn't always easy. It isn't always graceful. But there's honesty in the way they accept what's happening. And then quietly adjust. And when you widen the lens just a little, you may realize that all of us have had moments like that. Days when nothing went according to plan. Decisions made by someone else. Changes that forced us to stand on unfamiliar ground. Sometimes we react quickly. Sometimes we step back. Sometimes we need a longer silence than we expected. And who knows? In those quiet stretches, maybe we're also placing our own tiles back into position. I sometimes wonder, when we look back on the upheavals we've lived through, will we see them only as disruption? Or might we also see them as the place where we learn balance? Is there a turning point in your life that once left you unsettled, but later helped you understand yourself a little more clearly? Maybe each of us would answer differently, and maybe there's no need for a clear answer right now. It might be enough to know that even in the unexpected, there's still a way to keep your heart intact, still a way to keep walking, slowly, with weight in every step. And in that slowness, there's something gentle, like the soft yellow light at the end of the day. Not blinding, not loud, but steady enough to guide the next few steps forward.